It's time for the Mental Health Moment, a show exploring the world of mental health and answers for life. Brought to you by Life Launch Centers. Here's your host, Joe Newman.
Welcome to the Mental Health Moment. It's Monday again and time to take time for your mental health. I'm your host, Joe Newman from Life Launch Centers. And this is the show where we talk about all things for your mental health. We teach healthy coping mechanisms, discuss current situations that affect our mental health, and give you tips, ideas, and resources that you can implement right now. You know, mental health is kind of a hot topic right now, probably because we're seeing it affect so many of our youth and young adults. And if you're not familiar with what Life Launch Centers is, that's what we do. We help families overcome anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, and a wide variety of mental health issues. You know, the first thing that helps families is to realize that they're not alone in their struggles. The stigma around mental health prevents families from seeking help. And, we, through modern technology and medical advances like brain scans and imaging, we've learned some pretty amazing things about how the brain works physically in producing mental health disorders. And then what we can do intentionally to decrease intense emotion and things that we can do to cope in healthy ways. So that's essentially what we do at Life Launch Centers, is teach the emotional tools in a group counseling format to families. So things like distress tolerance tools, mindfulness, how to build healthy human-to-human connections. These are all things that we help families learn to manage these difficult emotions. So if anxiety, depression, social struggles, anything emotionally overwhelming has overtaken your family, please don't hesitate. Give us a call. The number is 833-803-3883. And speaking of families struggling, I've got a very special guest on the show with me today. Her name is Kristy Pike. She's the director of the Children's Justice Center here in Washington County. And, every day she sees the hard things that families face. So Kristy, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be with you, Joe.
You've been on the show with me before. It was a while ago, and it was just such a great opportunity because I love the resources that our community has to help families. And that's, I think, what we're really trying to achieve on this show, is to help families know they don't have to struggle through this stuff alone.
Right.
Can you, and this, we were kind of talking about why maybe we'd have you on the show and some things we'd talk about. This is an important month, right? This is, I guess October is designated as Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
It is.
Does that play into what you see at the Children's Justice Center?
Absolutely. It does. Most of what we saw last year were children who had been victims of sexual assault or sexual abuse, but we also see kids who have been physically abused. We see neglect, and we will also see sometimes kids who have watched domestic violence. And what we also know is that all of these there's a thing called polyvictimization.
Yeah.
So things that put kids at risk for one type of victimization also might put them at risk for another type of victimization.
Absolutely.
So yes, and we work closely. Our community actually has something called a coordinated community response team for sexual assault and domestic violence. So those of us who work in this field work together. We get together once a month and spend that time coordinating the resources in the community. So we all know what everybody has, where the holes are. And that's been a great thing in our community. Not every community has that, but here in Washington County, we do. And that's an awesome resource.
I know we really try to go above and beyond. And I really love the approach you guys take there, because, I think when people hear Children's Justice Center, sometimes they get that confused with the court. And
yes,
from what I understand about the center, this is not like punitive. This is where you seek advocacy and help, right? Like,
yes, actually, what we call a Children's Justice Center here in Utah, and that name is set by state statute by the legislature.
Yeah.
Almost anywhere else in the country would be called a Children's Advocacy Center. So, do we have anything to do with court? Well, in so much that we help victims navigate court. and help prepare them for court possibly, and sit with them in court if they need us to, and let them know how their case is proceeding through court. That is all part of the victim advocacy piece that we offer. We also do forensic interviews with children who investigators might need to know what has happened to this victim. And we do it here in a soft space. It's a home-like environment with a professional forensic interviewer so that we can mitigate the trauma and not re-traumatize victims who have already been victimized.
And I remember, help me correct me if I'm wrong on this, but one of the major points is that that coordinated team makes it so that the child doesn't have to recount the victimization over and over and re-traumatize. And so that team is crucial to help minimizing the trauma.
Yeah, that multidisciplinary team that includes law enforcement, child protective services, mental health experts, our medical team. We have a special child abuse medical team here provided by Primary Children's Safe and Healthy Families. Victim advocates, prosecution, all work together so that the child doesn't have to be hit from multiple different ways.
Yeah, I mean, that can be so hard, just have to, tell the story over and over. And so it's an awesome way. And really, I think what we're talking about here is that we got to pull our heads out of the sand. Like, this stuff is everywhere. Like, I think a lot of people want to believe that, not my family or not my neighbors or whatever, but I don't know. You tell me, you guys probably don't have much to do there. That doesn't really, this doesn't exist in our community, right?
Well, what we know is that it does exist in our community. It exists in every neighborhood. It exists on your street. It exists on mine. So
it crosses social and socioeconomic bounds.
Absolutely. It does. The CDC numbers tell us that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually assaulted before age 18.
1 in 4.
1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys.
Wow. I mean, you take any group of kids and there's going to be at least 1 to 2, in a group of 5 kids. That's staggering.
I have 5 kids, so that number is particularly poignant to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I have 7. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, oh my gosh. And you know what? I see this, like, it's, we work real closely with schools and communities. And I think the major message we're trying to push right now to help families realize is that this is affecting your family, whether you know it or not.
It is. And here's the other thing. It's affecting our kids, whether it's them or not. Because if you have a teenager who has been sexually assaulted or is experiencing violence at home, who are they going to tell? They're going to tell their friend. Does your child know what they need to know in order to get help for their friend? Yeah.
Well, and that's, I think, what we were hoping to accomplish on the show today is to talk a little bit about some of these adverse childhood experiences. And there's an amazing study around this. Adverse childhood experiences they often use the acronym ACEs.
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about that. What what the Children's Justice Center does to help educate and help families through some of these things.
Well, let's talk about ACEs for just a second, if we can. So they kind of fall into 3 categories. There are neglect, there's abuse, and then there is just basic family dysfunction. So that might include things like drug abuse, domestic violence, as we talked about earlier, incarceration, divorce, and other kinds of family dysfunction. So what they found is that children who experience 4 or more of those kinds of adverse childhood experiences during their lifetime, during their childhood, then are much more susceptible not only to things like suicide and depression and addictions as adults. It also has an actual physical component as well, and they're twice as likely to experience cancer. They're actually much more likely to experience 9 of the 10 leading causes of death in this country.
Yeah, that was mind blowing to me when I learned that these adverse childhood experiences not only have an impact mentally, but even physically, like more likelihood of, I think heart problems was one of them that was correlated to it.
Yep. Heart disease, respiratory disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, suicide.
Yeah. Sometimes we pay more attention to the physical implications, but I mean, the mental health implications are just as harmful, damaging, or dangerous.
Yeah. Yes. But the good news is that's not where it ends, right? There are ways that we can mitigate and buffer the toxic stress that can be caused from adverse childhood experiences.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're trying to focus on here today is where, what do parents want to do? We got to establish that there is a problem. Like we got to pull our heads out of the sand and realize that when either situation or we subject our kids to these kind of adverse experiences, it's going to have impact on them. And then what do we do to minimize that? And what do we do to help alleviate some of the problems? So, I mean, I think one of the major things that was interesting to me was that they don't have to have gone through the experience themselves. Like they don't have to be physically abused, even if they witness physical abuse, especially of a parent in the home. That's an adverse childhood experience.
It is. Yeah. It doesn't have to be, they don't have to be the one being hit. Watching their mother experience domestic violence is an adverse childhood experience. And it's the kind of adverse childhood experience that doesn't usually happen once, right?
Yeah.
These ACEs are often things that are ongoing. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris has done a lot of work in ACEs. She's the Surgeon General in California, and she's a former pediatrician, worked with lots of at-risk kids. And the way she describes it is, we have this adrenaline dump that we get, the hormones that we get when we need to deal with a stressful experience, which is great. It's how we've adapted and how we keep ourselves alive. But that's great when you meet a bear in the forest. But when you come home to the bear or the bear comes home to you every night, that's when you're going to have the maladaptation of that stress response. And it can cause lifelong issues.
Lifelong issues. Absolutely. I've got to jump to a break here, but we're going to talk more about, resilience and things parents can do to minimize that trauma. And so, if you're not familiar once again with what Life Launch Centers does, we work with youth and young adults ages 11 to 26 and their families who are struggling with anxiety, depression, other difficult mental health conditions. We really try to work with the mental health side of what we're talking about here today. But group counseling really is the most effective form of therapy. And if you feel like you've tried counseling and it didn't work, you need group. That's where growth really happens. The defensive walls come down and they're able to progress really quickly because they see that they're not alone in their struggles and that they're really able to connect with people their own age. So, the best part is that most insurances actually cover treatment. We're a network with Select Health, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Medicaid, PEHP, EM, all the big ones, as well as we can get single case agreements with your insurance company. So especially with deductibles being paid off, we got a lot of people right now looking for help because we really do need to pull our heads out of the sand and realize that we need to get our family and our loved ones the help they need. So don't wait. Just give us a call. We do a free 15-minute phone consultation to help strategize with you what would be the best course of action to help your loved one. So that number is 833-803-3883. And we'll be back in just 1 minute.
Hi, my name is Kennedy, and I went through the Life Launch Centers program about 2 years ago for roughly 11 weeks. And to anyone who is thinking about joining this program, I offer some words of advice. Before I joined, I did not want to. My mom had been giving me these ideas to join a group and to go to therapy, and I pushed against her. And I said, I don't need this. I'm fine. I'm strong enough. I don't need help. Like, what do you mean? And it wasn't until one day, actually, there's a specific day in my mind where I woke up and it was just, my world felt like it was crashing in. It was a pivotal moment for me where I finally saw clearly, I do need help. And so I went to my mom and I said, okay, I'm ready. And that changed my life. don't wait until the last second when your world is crashing in. Just go for it. Just reach out and ask for help, because it's so worth it. You don't have to be afraid. No one is going to judge you. No one thinks that you're weak. You're actually strong for asking for help. And so I would say 100% reach out, go for it, go to group. It's so fun, and you start to learn all these tools to help you and others around you, and you gain confidence in yourself, which is what I needed. And I'm so thankful for that, because now I get to be a confident girl that loves life instead of hating life and hating myself. So do it, go for it.
Welcome back to the Mental Health Moment. I'm your host, Joe Newman from Life Launch Centers. And today I've got with me Kristy Pike. She's the director of the Children's Justice Center here in Washington County. And Kristy, thank you once again for joining me on the show today.
Happy to be here.
You know, we've been talking about mental health, especially regarding some of these adverse childhood experiences that people, have in their life, the mental and physical implications that has. If anybody's not familiar with that study, jump on the internet and just search ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And there's a lot of information about that. Some great videos out there. I'll probably even put some of that in the links on this podcast. But you guys, I'm interested to ask Kristy, what do parents do to minimize trauma in our kids' lives?
So it's not always going to be something we can do, right? There's going to be stressors. There are going to be stressors in our kids' lives, whether it's a tough test, that's a stressor, but that can be a good stressor. That kind of a stressor can help our kids develop some resilience and build up those muscles, if you will. Then there are events that can be really traumatic. I would say COVID could fall into that category.
Wow, yeah,
but
absolutely.
then there are the ongoing really bad things that are not mitigated. Those are something that we really have got to put an end to.
So we're talking
that's
about
our mission.
So we're talking about, like in the ACEs study, they talk about divorce, talk about drug use, and they talk about incarceration. Hopefully these are things like, this is the kind of trauma we want to help our kids avoid.
Sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, all of those. Yes.
I mean, that's trauma, not necessarily, what you're talking about is we don't want to make life too easy. Like, in order to build resilience, they have to endure hard things, but not necessarily trauma. Right? That's what we're talking about.
Right. And when we can avoid trauma, obviously we want to avoid the trauma. But even when trauma occurs, that's not the end. There are so many things we know about resilience now, about buffering toxic stress, about things that really have been proven. They're evidence-based methods that have been proven to make a difference in kids' lives. One thing, honestly, is that parents need to recognize that their kids might be going through something. And so often our teenagers are so good at hiding, right? We might not know. So one thing that we do here is all the kids that come through who are old enough, we will do a screener with them that will screen for stress, and it screens for suicide, for suicidal ideation. And honestly, it asks questions about sleep. It asks questions about anxiety. Yeah. Parents are often stunned to know that the kids that they thought they had great relationships with really are struggling.
We experience the same thing in our assessments.
Yeah.
I hope parents realize, and maybe they can relate to this from their own childhood. Your child lies to you, just so you know. Children lie.
Especially the older they get, children will tell you what they think you want to hear.
Yes. And it's kind of self-preservation, right? They don't want to, get more in trouble, or maybe they don't want to make you, overly stressed or whatever. But, let's be honest, like, who didn't lie to their parents growing up? Like, everybody does. And you have to realize that your kids are going to do that. And you got to look at their behavior. You got to look at the fruits in their lives to know whether or not they need help. Like,
And take what we would call a trauma-informed approach.
Yes.
So if your child is if they're grumpy, if they're just really edgy, ask them some questions about their sleep. Are you sleeping all right? Because, what we've learned is that that's the first factor we have to address with kids is sleep. That you can't address anything else if the child is exhausted all the time. They need their sleep. So asking the questions, and honestly, the number one thing to do to help buffer, the number one buffer for anyone, kids, adults, anyone, is to have connections, to have good relationships. So every minute that you spend with your child, every dinner you have together, every drive in the carpool, every
movie
walk
you
around
watch together,
all those things can help buffer the hard things that are going to come to them in their lives, and having those ongoing relationships and connections, and letting them know that you can be trustworthy, not hyperventilating and overreacting when they bring you something hard, but sitting down with them and coming up with answers and results and being the grown up in the room. They need to know they can depend on their trusted adults to do that.
And those connections, absolutely. I mean,
connections are important.
Friendships or family, relationships.
And you don't have to be the parent, right? You
Right.
can be a teacher, you can be a neighbor, you can be a grandparent, you can be an older sibling, you can be a younger sibling. Sometimes my younger siblings are awesome. I don't have any older ones, but being that connection for someone is so big. And the other thing that we've learned, I was listening to a podcast called 1 in 10, which is put out by the National Children's Alliance. They found another thing that is absolutely key to resilience in kids is for them to have a purpose, for them to have someplace where they are needed, something that they have to do, which makes total sense, right?
Absolutely. It makes total sense. I love that because that's one of the first things that we do is help a youth or young adult establish their values. First of all, like what's important to them in their own life, and then set goals to help move them towards those values. And like you said, they have to have purpose, right? You have to know where you're going and why. And then those connections, man, that is so huge. Our group counseling, that's why we do the group counseling format, because I think a lot of people, when they think about counseling, it's a one-on-one, spill your guts to somebody and see if they have some wisdom to share. And that's really important for some getting things off your chest. But the practice and the ability to connect with these emotional tools that we talk about is done in group, or is done in building relationships with other people. And so whether that's your family or whether it's your peers, I love that.
Yes. And we stress therapy. So we have grants that allow us to provide therapy for victims of crimes, not only for the kids, but for the parents and maybe siblings as well, what we would call a secondary victim. And when people tell me, I've tried therapy, I don't like therapy, I tell them, well, you know what? I had a really bad haircut once. I didn't quit getting haircuts. I just tried something different. If one thing's not working, if it's not working for you, if you're not connecting, then try something new.
Right.
Until you find the fit for you, because therapy is such an important aspect and avenue for an overall healthy life.
And I think it's just another way to connect, right? Like in our world today, we just have so many things that are drawing us away from human connection. Or counterfeits, or, these digital interactions that promise connection, but really we don't feel healing through, these digital interactions. I mean, here we are putting a digital interaction out there we're doing the best we can in the circumstances, right? Right. I mean, the point is take these principles, go talk to a family member, a spouse, a friend, discuss it eye to eye, face to face. That's where the healing is going to happen. Yep.
And if eye to eye doesn't work with your spouse, your child, your significant other, try going for a walk and be parallel rather than face to face. Sometimes that can help people open up. A walk or a drive. Yeah.
Yeah, because face to face can feel combative, right?
Sometimes it can. Yeah. Again, find what works for you, but do something.
Well, Kristy, I got to wrap it up here, but it has been so awesome. And thank you so much again for being on the show with me today. How do people get in touch with the Children's Justice Center?
So if people need to report child abuse, I'm going to give the number for that. It's 855-323-3237. And that is how you report child abuse. And that is most of our clients either come through Child Protective Services or through law enforcement. So it's 855-323-3237. And everyone in the state of Utah is a mandatory reporter. If you have reason to believe a child is being abused, you by law need to report that.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include that in the description. And thank you once again for joining us, Kristy.
Thank you.
We hope everyone out there got some helpful ideas about how to help your kids avoid adverse childhood experiences and know what to do and what help is available. Your family doesn't have to struggle through this alone. That's what I love about living here is this community is so tight and there's so many resources available. So if you or a loved one is just overwhelmed with anxiety, depression, or any other mental health challenge, give us a call, 833-803-3883. This is Joe Newman signing off from Life Launch Centers. Until next time, keep those kids safe and keep your sanity.
You've been listening to The Mental Health Moment, brought to you by Life Launch Centers. For more info, visit them at lifelaunchcenters.com.